Coming up on Chasing the Natty, our 2023 CFF guide has been released, and we're going to give you all a taste of what you can find inside by breaking down 10 teams whom we think are being underrated from a fantasy perspective coming into this 2023 season. All this and more coming right after this.
Mesmerizing run by the quarterback.
Marvin Harrison Jr. touchdown. Marvelous
Ball next to the end zone. Dropped down for Franklin. Oh, majestic touchdown.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everybody. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning at 7 a.m. If you want to support the great work that we're doing here, head on over to campuscanton.com and subscribe there with one of our 3 awesome tiers. You'll find everything you need for your CFF leagues, your Devi leagues, or C2C leagues, including rankings, articles, tools, and even so much more than that. You can also find us on YouTube, where you'll see our CFF mock draft live streams, where we do a CFF draft every Sunday night live with a different guest up until the start of the season. So be sure to check that out. And also, if you want to participate in that, just shoot me a message on Twitter, which, speaking of which, I am on Twitter at CFF_Jared. You can also find the show there at Chasing the Nat. If you're interested in participating in those, just DM either one of those accounts and we'll make sure to get you in on those. With all that being said, welcome in, guys. I am excited and beat at the same time because this past couple of weeks have been an absolute crazy fest getting this CFF guide done for you guys, but it is out. It is there. You can find it on the Campus Canton website, only $20, pretty much everything you need for your CFF leagues this upcoming year. It is by far the thing I am the most proud of every single year that we do here at Campus Canton, guys. Is incredibly awesome. And today I have on me one of the people that has been instrumental in putting that together, and also is just an awesome guy, and one of the founders of campuscanton.com, Mr. Chris Moxley. Chris, welcome back to the show, dude.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think I've been on for probably 2 months, well, at least 2 months. I don't even know the last time I was on here. We haven't chatted on the airwaves in a while. So
I think the last time you were on was when you took. No. It was Justice and Ethan, and then Justice and Chris. So yeah, it's been even before that. I thought you were one of the guys that took on when I was away in May. So yeah, shoot, dude, it's been forever. We need to fix that. We need to get you on more often.
It really has.
But again, today's show, we are going to give you guys kind of a sneak peek into the CFF guide a little bit. Obviously, we're not going to go over everything that is in the guide, but one of the fun topics that kind of crops up when we're putting together this guide every year is we do a deep dive on all 133 teams in that guide. And so we start to become a little bit more familiar with some of the teams that we hadn't really gotten a chance to get around to yet. And so we get some teams every year that we think, there's a lot more to be excited about here, or at least a little bit more interesting here than we've kind of given it credit to up until this point. So Chris, you and I are going to dive into 10 of these teams today. Mostly G5 teams, but we got a couple of Power 5 teams in here as well that could definitely be of a lot of value for people. Because again, almost all of these teams, I put down the ADP for a lot of the players that are involved with them. A lot of these teams have guys that could be super valuable at the end of your draft, so be sure to listen on that. But before we get into it, I do want to do one quick little bit of homework here that I forgot to mention at the top of the show, even in my spiel. Campus Canton has a home field discount with home field attire. The promo code Campus Canton, you can get 15% off all of your vintage college gear. I'm actually pretty excited because they just launched a new line of Georgia vintage gear over there. So I'm definitely probably going to take some of my first paycheck, go on over there and use that promo code for that. You guys should too, because they have awesome stuff for all of your fan gear over there. So go check that out. Mox, I've been rambling long enough. Let's get into some of these teams here. Let's head on over. We're going to go alphabetical order with these guys, and we are going to first... where did my ticker tape go? My ticker tape's gone. That sucks. Anyway, let's start here with the A's. Let's go alphabetical order here. Let's go with Arkansas State. Rough year for this team last year. It's been historically a team that we love in CFF, especially during the Blake Anderson years, but man, last season was rough. 128th in rushing offense, 73rd in passing offense. Their defense couldn't hold anything up. They had no receivers over 500 yards last year. James Blackman, although he finally kind of solidified himself as a starting quarterback, very disappointing year. 2,400 passing yards, only 14 touchdowns, and less than 350 pass attempts. Again, just a rough year all around. But we go back 2 years ago to 2021. While it's definitely still a step back from the Blake Anderson offenses we had with the Red Wolves, they passed, combined between the two QBs that they're playing with Blackman and Hatcher, they passed 525 times and combined hit almost 3,800 yards and 27 touchdowns, but again, between the two of them. So, Mox, the major question with the Red Wolves here is, what can we expect this year? Do we expect what we got last year, or is the truth more like we got 2 years ago and they're in for a bounce back year this year? What do you think about these guys?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about this. I say a lot of reasons to be excited. We're talking about Arkansas State, right? So I think there's reasons to be tentatively excited. And a lot of that is probably better offensive line play. So last year they ranked 129th in offensive line yards. Line was terrible, probably the worst in the entire Sun Belt. When you're talking about that sort of conference in your last, it's a problem. But I think they're going to improve a lot. They brought in 3 pretty good transfers, all over 300 pounds. I think they might have the biggest offensive line in the conference. And that matters when we're talking about like 300 pounders versus dudes who are like 260, 270 that some of these teams have. So I think the overall unit is going to be better. So I think if the line is at least closer to like 80th rather than 129th, I think we're going to see a big improvement.
I would agree with that, definitely, because one thing that stuck out to me, this offensive line was terrible when it came to sack yards. They were in the bottom 20 in all of the country in terms of allowing sacks. James Blackman got sacked 35 times last year. They were averaging 3.17 sacks given up per game. It was an absolute nightmare for that offense to get going. It was an offense that was already struggling, but it didn't help that, they were getting set back at least 3 times a game because of a huge sack given up. So let's talk about some of the players involved with this offense. Mox, the only guy that at least I could see in our ADP that is consistently getting drafted in the top 20 rounds is Corey Rucker. Wide receiver 92, kind of being taken around the late round 16, early round 17 range. Versus everybody else involved in this offense, you got the 2 quarterbacks, Jackson Daly, JT Stroud. We'll see who wins out there. Zach Wallace is a guy I know that you're kind of interested in at running back. And then Jeff Foreman and Corey Jackson, 2 wide receivers. All of these guys are going undrafted. Corey Rucker getting drafted, but he's kind of the one that we're kind of waiting on a decision about his eligibility, right? So it feels like there's a lot of risk going on there. What do you kind of break down with some of these players involved here?
Yeah. Rucker is interesting because last year at South Carolina, he just didn't play. He had an ankle injury and just couldn't really get on the field. So he returned to Arkansas State where he had, 2 pretty good seasons. Jeff Foreman's weird because he, I guess took the weight room really seriously this offseason and added 20 pounds of muscle, which is bizarre. I've talked about that before where I just don't even like the idea that a player's adding 20 pounds when they're 170, whatever. But yeah, Zach Wallace is the guy I think I like more than anybody. Big transfer in from UT Martin. He's already 6 foot 220. Came to the program kind of he won this Workout Warrior Award, which I think matters to this team and Butch Jones and everyone. I think that those sorts of things are important. A guy who's leading by example. He's the biggest back they got. He was incredibly productive. He had 31 touchdowns in his last 2 seasons there. I like him somewhat. He led the spring game in rushing yardage, and if the offensive line is going to improve, I think that he's going to be the guy. We just need the offensive line to improve. It is really the end of the day. But I don't know if I want to touch the passing game. I don't know how it's going to really shake out all that much. I think it's going to be Jackson Daly starting, I'm pretty sure. They brought in Jalen Raynor, who I think is a pretty interesting stash candidate in CFF Dynasty. But, I mean, you're probably still a year away from him, but I think he's a good player. So the offense has the pieces to be good. It depends on whether or not these three big transfers are going to make an impact or not.
Yeah, I'll start with Zach Wallace. Zach Wallace, I haven't dug too much into. Again, it makes me happy to hear that he is a pretty big dude. Again, like you said, 6 foot, over 200 pounds. That's good. That's very good to hear, especially in a G5 program. But again, we just haven't really seen a clear workhorse running back with Butch Jones going on over here with Arkansas State. So I'm a little skeptical there. But again, a lot of these things are talent-based. So maybe if he does separate himself fully from the rest of the pack in that running back room, we could see him take off here. You're pretty confident in Jackson Daly starting. I want to believe, because I actually do like Jackson Daly, but it scares the crap out of me that Butch Jones brought in JT Shrout, who Butch Jones knows from his time over there at Tennessee. Jackson Daly's a young guy, he's a true freshman last year. If they're not comfortable starting him this early on, do you think it's outside of the possibility that they go with a guy like JT Shrout, who has started for Tennessee, started for Colorado? Not that he's been good at either of those programs, but it is experience at the end of the day.
So just based on the spring reports, I feel confident it's going to be Daly. But that probably means that his leash is a little bit shorter because there's a guy with experience. And like if they had to go to Jalen Raynor immediately, I don't think he's getting pulled because Raynor is a true freshman.
Yeah.
Who just got on campus. But I do think that, he struggles, and I think he will because, our recruiting team actually was a fan of him last year. They ranked him kind of highly, especially for a kid going to Arkansas State. But he's probably going to struggle in his first opportunity starting. It's not a great system around him. So I think he's going to take the snap week 1. They don't play week 0, do they?
I don't believe so.
Whatever, the first game of the season. I do think his leash could be a little short. Yeah, that's a possibility.
Okay, fair enough. Again, I'm trying to make sure I'm going through my notes. Anything else I wanted to bring up here? Again, the passing options. Again, Corey Rucker being drafted the highest, but again, that eligibility thing is still kind of sticking out there. Jeff Foreman, he's been a spring darling the last 2 years, and then he goes out and does nothing when the actual season comes around.
Corey Rucker got his waiver approved, by the way.
Okay, cool. Appreciate that. So Corey Rucker is good to go, y'all. So yeah, I would still draft Corey Rucker out of the bunch here. Courtney Jackson might be somewhat interesting. Again, whenever you see a guy go from the P5 to the G5, stuff it in the back of your mind. If you're in a CFF Dynasty, just grab him really late in your supplementals, see what happens with them, because I think he belongs on a pretty deep roster. So we'll see. All right. Let's move on to our next guys over here. Let's go and talk about Colorado State. This was one of our ultimate. We were a year early on these guys last year. We wanted that Nevada offense to translate so quickly over to Colorado State, and it made all the sense in the world. Again, it's the same conference. You're playing up against the same guys. But we really underestimated how much roster turnover we were going to need to see from the Rams before they could get there. Now, given the fact that we have them on this list, you have a pretty good idea that me and Mox are both of the mindset that they have the roster turnover that they needed, and they're ready to improve on what was admittedly, again, a very rough year 1 here. 3-9, less than 2,000 yards passing for Clay Millen. They had to rely on the run game a whole lot more because Avery Morrow had a pretty decent year rushing. Again, Mox, you had a great stat in our guide where they went from 58% neutral game pass rate to 38%. That's a 20% drop in a single year. That's I don't want to say it's unheard of because I'm sure there's other examples, but it's still pretty darn
gigantic.
It's nuts. And then Torrey Horton was basically carrying the offense last year. He caught 64.5% of the balls that were thrown to the top 3 receivers on the team. And y'all, I thought Arkansas State was bad when it came to giving up sacks. Colorado State was the worst team in the country when it came to it. They gave up 59 sacks throughout the year. That is 4.92 sacks per game. And in total, it came out to just under 400 total yards of sacks. So they get that fixed, or hopefully, or I'll throw it over to you, Mox. Did they get that fixed? That offensive line is going to be an issue here. But also, did they get the roster turnover they needed at other spots to kind of get this going this year?
Yeah, they brought in 3, I think, really good FCS transfers on the offensive line. Savan Henderson out of Lane College, Drew Moss out of Lamar, and Oliver Jervis out of Monmouth, who were all conference in their respective conference. They also returned their 2 best linemen, Jacob Gardner and Keegan Hamilton. Gardner's a center. I think that continuity is really important. So I think that unit's definitely going to be better. And I think that unit was a big problem last year overall, right? Because Clay Millen was awesome. Mm-hmm. We look at the stats and he's like, okay, he kind of sucked. But we looked a little bit further. Deep passing adjusted accuracy, first in the country, 64%. 49% big throw rate, first in the country. Like, this is a guy who could only attempt 33 deep passes because he didn't have the opportunities to get 5-step drops more like at all, because the offensive line just couldn't hold up. He attempted 23.4 passes per game. Nevada averaged 39. So that is a 16-ish pass attempt per game gap between what Norvell traditionally did and what he did last year. I really like the opportunity for this offense to turn around. And we're going to talk about another offense that had this very similar situation. But when you go from like kind of a broken offensive system, what was being run at Colorado State previously under Steve Adazio, and honestly, the last couple of years have been a mess, and then to something totally different like the air raid, it takes more than 1 year. So I think year 2 is where we're going to see a lot of these concepts work. And a lot of that is offensive line. Like, there's continuity there. It's a whole new system that you have to adjust to. It's not just the players, it's system-based. And I think they have a pretty good supporting cast, in my opinion. Like, I think the players in this team are good enough to be highly competitive. It's just the system, man. System takes a while to learn.
Well, I'm glad you answered already one of my biggest questions, because one of my biggest questions at the bottom of my notes here is like, is Clay Millen just not as good as we thought he'd be? Because again, like, you had God, what's his name? The quarterback from Nevada, Carson Strong. It's like, you got Carson Strong, and he turned out to not be a very good quarterback at all. He went undrafted in the NFL draft and everything like that. So you're really thinking like, oh, anybody could do this. And then Clay Millen comes in and looks disastrous year 1. But like you said, if you dig a little bit deeper, he was a lot better than people were giving him credit for. So yeah, it turns out he's probably as good as we expect him to be.
I think he is. I mean, it's like 14% of his total attempts were past 19 yards. Mm-hmm. Like, I think he has a good arm too, and he's weapons that can operate deep. And he was the best quarterback in the country when he was throwing deep. I think the recipe for success is there. We just need him to attempt more than like 2 deep passes a game.
Let's talk about some.
Did last year.
Let's talk about some of that supporting cast you kind of alluded to there. Obviously, we got Torrey Horton. Everybody loves Torrey Horton. He's a wide receiver 4 in ADP. You get him in your late first, early second round. It's probably the reason why some of you are looking at me being like, Jared, how is this an underrated offense? Like, one of these guys is going in like the top like 20 picks in every single draft. Yes, but the rest of this team I think is super underrated, because Clay Millen, Dylan Goffney, who transferred in from SMU, both of those guys are going undrafted. Clay Millen might be the bigger tragedy there. But then you got Justice Ross Simmons, a very experienced guy with the system at this point. He's going as wide receiver 96 in draft. So around like your late 17, early 18th round range, probably a bit wider range than that, but it's kind of around where he's going. And then this new tight end toy that the Rams have brought over, Mr. Dallin Holker. He was a former tight end out of BYU, had a decent start for the Cougars last year, but kind of stopped his season 4 games in, said, I'm transferring, keeping that year of eligibility, and is headed over here to the Rams. So, Box, kind of break down some of these toys that Clay Millen here has to work with. Again, obviously we all love Horton, but what about some of these other guys? Are they valuable in CFF drafts?
I think Justice Ross Simmons is. I thought he was pretty good last year in his first opportunity. I believe he's a true sophomore, right? If he's not a true sophomore, he's a second-year player, or like second year in terms of opportunity. I I think he's a good player. And so I was impressed with what he was able to do in limited work last year. And I think that this offense can support 2 wide receivers if we get the passing volume that we think we're going to get. So I think you need to be drafting him. Clay Millen is obvious to me that he needs to be drafted. It's like even the last round of your draft, just take a stab on him because nobody's taking him now. Then yeah, I'm with you on Holker. Another like Norvell has traditionally used the tight end a lot, right? We saw how successful he was with it in Nevada and Cole Turner. So, and Holker was like awesome in spring. Like they couldn't stop talking about him. So I do think that he could be a pretty big part of that offense. I'm not sure where I land on Dylan Goffney. I really like Dylan Goffney. Is it 2 years ago now? Is it last year? I don't remember. I thought he was going to break out at SMU and he didn't.
He did not.
And yeah, but I mean, it's a pretty shallow wide receiver room. So he's probably the guy in 3 wide receiver sets, and they run a lot of 3 and 4 wide receiver sets in the air raid.
Yeah. I have a ton, and I mean a ton of shares of Dallin Holker. Again, his ADP is mid 18th round. If I am struggling at tight end, I pretty much put him at the top of my queue at the start of like the 15th round and kind of see where I feel comfortable grabbing him from there because the upside is absolutely insane. Cole Turner in 2020 in a limited action, 49 catches, 605 yards, 9 touchdowns, followed that up with another season of 62 catches, 677 yards, and 10 touchdowns. If that is what we can expect from Dallin Holker, he's an absolute steal where he's going. But even if he doesn't reach that height, let's not give him the ceiling right now. Let's put him like at 100 yards less. He's still probably going to finish higher than the tight end 27, which is where he's going in ADP right now. Like, is that fair for me to say, Mox?
Yeah, I think he's I don't want to say locked in tight end too, because tight end is like an impossible position to predict outside the top 5. But I mean, he's got as good a shot as anyone being drafted in that range to outperform his ADP. How about that?
I think that's a fair enough read right there. Last but not least, last year, Norvell had to rely on the run game a lot more than we've kind of typically seen him do at Nevada. You had Avery Morrow have over 800 yards, carrying might have hit 900 yards. But there were times where they just straight up relied on him. He had 20 plus carries in 5 different games last year. Do we think two questions here? One, do we think they move back away from that and go back towards the pass like we saw at Nevada to the point where it kind of neuters the run game completely and nobody's valuable there? Or does a guy like maybe Kobe Johnson, the running back transfer from North Dakota State, still kind of have some value here because there are going to be games where they'll give him some volume, or maybe even a freshman like Damian Henderson? How do you kind of read this backfield, Mox?
So we're pretty sure that Morrow's not playing this year, right?
It sounds pretty bad with his stuff.
Yeah, he's facing a felony assault charge or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's his legal situation is pretty complicated. I thought Morrow was pretty good as a player, so I don't know if I want to assign that role to a different running back in the offense and say, hey, like we think that this player could get usage, because Morrow was involved in the receiving game, and I don't think Kobe Johnson, who could be the RB1, is the same level of receiver. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to draft a running back out of this room, and if that bites me, then I'll just pick him up off waivers. But I'm very skeptical that we get a repeat performance.
Nope, fair enough. All right, let's go ahead and move on here. Let's go back over from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast, down into the crazy land known as Florida, with the Florida Atlantic Owls over here. Tom Herman comes in to the Owls. I forgot what city Florida Atlantic's based out of. That's my bad, y'all.
Are they in Boca Raton? Did I make that up?
No, you're right. It's Boca Raton. I remember now because they went to the Boca Raton Bowl, which is basically their home stadium. Okay. Anyway, they're moving on from Willie Taggart. They're moving on to Tom Herman, which is, in my opinion, at least on paper, a huge upgrade when it comes to offensive production.
On paper, in real life, in reality, yeah. Yeah, all the above, definitely.
just an upgrade all around. They bring in Casey Thompson to start at quarterback. Again, I doubt that Daniel Richardson, who came in from Central Michigan, is going to really give them any run there. Herman has produced some great CFF quarterbacks in the past. You got Sam Ehlinger at Texas for 3 years there. Greg Ward at Houston was just an absolute monster for them. He's also been really good at producing some top wide receivers for CFF. Tom Herman is in the top 20 coaches in America for producing wide receiver 1 points per game and wide receiver 2 points per game. You can find all those stats in our guide, by the way, as well. So, Mox, let's start with the quarterback situation and the wide receiver situation here. We have Casey Thompson, QB 41 in ADP, kind of being taken around the mid 15th round. LeJontay Wester is definitely the highest guy being taken right now. Mid 8th round, wide receiver 31 off the board. And then Burton, who is, everybody kind of believes he is kind of the consensus number 2 guys, Jaquan Burton. He's not being drafted at all. So what do you think about each of those 3 values right there? And do you think they're underrated compared to what this offense could be, or do you think they're right about where they should be?
I like Wester a lot, and I have a lot of Wester, even from last year. He was a player that I was drafting. You know, he's boom potential. He's a pretty talented player. But I think I'm lower on this offense than like anybody else is, apparently, because I keep seeing everyone is obsessed with Casey Thompson, and I'm like, dude, this is just Casey Thompson. Like, I just. Not that I don't see the path, because we look at Tom Herman's production, like you were talking about. Like he's produced running backs at a high rate, receivers at a high rate. He knows how to play with quality
not running backs typically. It's quarterbacks that he does a lot with.
Oh, just quarterbacks, wide receivers. So we know that he knows how to run a passing offense. I'm still a little skeptical. I'm just not a Casey Thompson like truther. I think he's fine. I think he's probably going to be fine in this conference too. But this isn't like the conference is worse than it was, but it's still like probably the top conference in group of 5. Like there are still some good teams in this conference in the AAC. And so, you know, I like Wester, and I've talked to some people in like scouting circles who think Jaquan Burton is being heavily underutilized and could be a player who is like going to be in the Shrine Bowl potentially.
Okay.
I don't know what that means for his production, but they do think he's really talented. So do with that information what you will. But I'm lower on this offense than I think everybody else is. But I understand the path forward.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, again, going back to Jaquan Burton and everything, if they do utilize him well, Herman has shown that he can produce wide receiver 2 fantasy production at a pretty high level. Again, like I said, he's in the top 20. So definitely somebody to keep an eye on at the very end of your drafts. In fact, I'm going to go, actually, no, shoot. I'm not going to say that because we're in the same draft, Mox.
24 team draft that we're in, CFF Dynasty, you mean?
Yes, that one. That absolute nightmare of a draft. There's no values falling to us anywhere in that draft.
I like my team. I feel like I'm getting values. Maybe speak for yourself, man.
Yeah, I'm glad you're confident. Anyway, again, Casey Thompson. Again, I get your point. Again, if I were to line up Casey Thompson versus Sam Ehlinger, like Sam Ehlinger is a way more talented quarterback. There's a reason why one of them's probably never going to play it down in the NFL. One of them is a consistent backup in the NFL right now. Like I would say that, Ehlinger. Even though again, I am not quite expecting Ehlinger level production here. But I don't need him to be Ehlinger level production for him to still be a valuable CFF QB, because Ehlinger was a top 10 QB pretty much every year that he played for Tom Herman at Texas. Casey Thompson playing in a worse conference here, I think he could get pretty close, and I think that could be a ton of fun for us everywhere.
To a top 10 quarterback? Hold on.
Both of us saying hold on, because I think you might have misinterpreted something.
What is Casey Thompson's ceiling in this offense?
I think if everything goes right, he could hit Ehlinger levels. Probably not at least in terms of the passing game. Probably not
quarterback where in terms of like finish.
I think top 24. I think top 24 is pretty reasonable.
Okay. That's if everything goes right, he might get there. Okay, I thought we were talking top 12. Top 15, and I'm like, you're not getting there. If he gets there, I'll get face tattoo or something. No, I'm not.
don't do that, Mox. You know how close you got last time.
I just get a little excited sometimes, but yeah, sorry. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page about that, because I don't think he has quarterback 1 in his range of outcomes, and I think he's more likely to be a low end quarterback 3.
I think if truly everything goes right, top 12 is within his range of outcomes. But that's not me being reasonable. If I'm being reasonable,
I don't. What has to go right though? Like I just don't understand that path. Like Wester, I think is a good player, and I think Jaquan Burton is a good player. But like Larry McCammon's nothing. Kobe Lewis is nothing. Like the offensive line is fine. It's not great. They don't have any tight end weapons. Their wide receiver depth stinks. It's like that's the concern that I have. I think the core is okay.
Their defense becomes awful. That's part of it going right. And also, the main question I have with Casey Thompson is how much does Herman let him run? Because Herman is not afraid to let his quarterbacks run. But also, Thompson has never been a guy. Well, again, he got plenty of touchdowns over in Nebraska, so clearly they weren't afraid to kind of let him run sometimes. But he also didn't, have mind-blowing rushing production or anything like that. So it's a question of, was he being underutilized at a place like Nebraska and Tom Herman's about to unleash him in the running game? Or is he just not that good of a rusher, and that's what's going to keep him from getting Ellinger levels?
Yeah, I guess that's fair, right? Their offensive line was pretty good last year. They're in, I think, 20th in average line yards, and they bring back three starters and like 4 or 5 guys with experience. So
perfect.
It could happen. I'm skeptical it does, but it could happen.
So, Mox, you're skeptical about Casey Thompson. One guy I cannot understand where people are coming from with this offense is a lot of people have started saying that Larry McCammon is worth something. Like he's like worth where he's going in drafts right now. I just really don't see it. Even in the mid to late 15th round where he's kind of been going and everything like that. Like, yeah, he had over 200 touches last year. But Tom Herman's been very, very clear that this is going to be a committee approach at the running back position here. Like, it's going to be McCammon, it's going to be Kobe Lewis coming over from Purdue/Central Michigan. And then, is it Mobley?
It's Mobley.
But Mobley's going to be involved as well. And everywhere that Herman has gone, he's gone with a committee approach for the most part, except for, I think, his first year at Houston. He went with he had kind of a true workhorse back. I forget the guy's name off the top of my head. But other than that, he's gone committee approach ever since then. And McCammon's nothing really special. Again, he didn't outproduce Mobley on a down-to-down basis last year. So it's not like he's clearing away the best running back on this team. I think that's a complete avoid for me in the 15th round. I'm not touching the run game here at all.
I mean, if we're talking a best ball, right? I'm looking at his game log last year. I think he has probably 4 weeks that he made your lineup. And that is if you didn't really have anything else going on. He's just a low ceiling player. Like he scored more than 1 touchdown in a single week, which was the last week of the season. And he eclipsed 100 yards like 4 times. And that was against Charlotte, Southeast Alabama, FIU, and WKU. Like, you're playing with fire for a guy who had over 210 touches last year. 209 touches, sorry. So, like, I don't think he's going to repeat 209 touches, and I don't think he's going to be as efficient. The offense just isn't good enough to support him plus, like, 30% of another guy or 30% of a committee. Like, even if he gets 60% of touches, like, I just don't see it with him. I think he's a low ceiling player.
Yeah, fair enough. I fully agree with you on that one. That is where we can agree, Mox. Is that Larry McCammon is not a value right now. Don't buy into that. Let's go over to another team where it feels like the entire team in some way is a value. Let's go talk about Fresno State right now. This is a team that has been great for us in CFF the last couple of years, but man, they lose a ton this offseason. And that's kind of the question surrounding everything is, did they lose too much? And can the team recover from that? They lost quarterback Jake Haener, running back Jordan Mims. They lose their top 3 receivers in Jalen Moreno-Cropper, Nico Remigio, and Zane Pope. In terms of some of the guys they gained, though, in addition to the players they lost, they also lose Kirby Moore, their offensive coordinator, over to Missouri. So they're having to replace him as well. In terms of the guys that they've gained, though, they do bring in Mikey Keene, who, one, has a bit more rushing upside than I would say Jake Haener had, but also there's quite a few people who were kind of on the Mikey Keene train over at UCF. So again, you put him in an offense that has, produced a guy like Jake Haener, who did just get drafted this past year. Maybe they can do something with him. They also bring in a JUCO guy in Josiah Freeman, who Jake Haener himself endorsed at the NFL Combine, saying like, this is your next up guy right here. But what do you think overall, Mox? Like, again, we got a lot of players we'll kind of dive into here, but overall with this offense, like, Are you concerned about this offense in terms of just how much they lost, and do you think it's going to kind of be a little bit of a rebuilding process for them, at least this year?
So I think that's what the majority of people think, which is why all these players are being pushed down the board. I don't think it's going to be as extreme as one would initially believe. They lose a lot of production. Yeah, they're bottom 30 in both returning production on offense and defense. So obviously that's a concern. And you lose Jake Haener, is probably one of the better quarterbacks of the last 5-10 years in the group of 5 level. So like, yes, those are objectively bad things. But I also think Jeff Tedford kind of knows what he's doing. So he was the head coach before Kalen DeBoer was. He hired DeBoer. DeBoer was his offensive coordinator, and then took over. Then went to Washington. Then Jeff Tedford came back, and like I think the offense is going to be essentially fine. I mean, it's probably not going to be as good, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to get production from this. Like I like Mike Keane. I liked Mike Keane last year. I thought he should have started over JRP. JRP can't throw the ball, but like he can run, so that's what happened. He's Gus Malzahn, but whatever. Not bitter about it. But I keep seeing people like Malik Sherrod is if I had to pick one player being drafted outside the top 30 at his position to finish as a top 5 RB, it would be him. Like this offense just consistently uses a primary back. Under Tedford, it was true. Under DeBoer, it was true. And the offensive coordinator is just a guy that they promoted on staff. Like Pat McCann is not anybody who is unfamiliar with the system. Like he and the offense and DeBoer, like their MO is essentially, hey, feed the primary guy. And Malik Sherrod was a guy who was excellent in spring. He caught a touchdown pass in the spring game. He had multiple receptions in the spring game. Explosive rusher. Like I just think that he's a player who can be really, really productive in this offense. So like he's someone that I have drafted, I think, in almost every draft. I just love the idea of Malik Sherrod. And I don't think there's a back on this roster who's close. Like Damian Moore is, in my opinion, not good. Elijah Gilliam, I don't know anything really about him, but I don't think he's as good as Malik Sherrod.
Yeah, I got Malik Sherrod rated as my RB48, and honestly, I feel like I need to be a bit more aggressive than that, because I fully agree with you. Again, like, this team, like, again, in our guide, you can find which coaches have produced the best running back one fantasy production year over year, and Tedford's in that list. He is number 20th among all coaches in FBS for producing these running back ones in terms of points per game. Kind of the downside of Sherrod, though, I would say, is again, had a bit of a Met performance in a bowl game against Wazoo at the end of the year when he was kind of the guy. But like, if you're gonna let one bad game kind of throw you off of him, I think you were never gonna probably draft him in the first place. But again, he's going
and that Wazoo rushing defense is not bad either.
No, it is.
By the way, that was a good front 7 last year, and like that's a that's a Power 5 opponent. Like he's gonna play them like a Power 5 opponent like twice a year. Like that should not scare anyone to the point where they are dropping him like 10, 15 spots in the rankings.
No, and
because I've heard that argument a lot, and I just don't think it's all that strong.
It's not, and again, it definitely doesn't warrant putting him down as the RB75 off the board in most drafts, late 17th round. Like that's an absolute steal for a team that has consistently put out these workhorse backs. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. Let's talk about the wide receivers here, Mox. This is where I think both of us are a little bit more skeptical in terms of like trying to find the value here. Again, Josiah Freeman got endorsed by Jake Haener at the NFL Combine, kind of shot him up a lot.
Shout out to Eric Froton for getting that information for us.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, Froton. He kind of shot up boards for a little bit there, but it seems like kind of the whole community, the industry, is kind of slowly kind of let him drop again to the point now where he is the wide receiver 83rd off the board, kind of mid to late 16th round. You see people kind of take the shot on him there. You also got Eric Brooks, who is kind of the lead returning receiver there. Where are you kind of finding the value between those two guys, Mox?
The concern that I have with Freeman is like, so I read a lot of the reports out of spring, and like they talked about him as probably being the wide receiver 1, but like he wasn't all over spring reports like a guy that you would expect that to be the case. And so I became a little skeptical. Mm-hmm. I'm not his biggest fan. I think I maybe drafted him once, and I've done like 10, 12 drafts. So like that tells you kind of how I feel about him. so he's not a player that I'm like rushing to get, but I think there's a pretty good chance that he is the wide receiver one. I don't love Eric Brooks. I think if anything, I'm more interested in like Jalen Gill, who they brought in from Boston College. I think he could be a higher impact player than Eric Brooks could. But I just find it so hard to invest in this passing offense because I don't know where it's gonna lead, and I just think it might be a low average depth of target passing scheme, and so I mean that benefits a guy like Malik Sherrod again, and probably Mike Keene using his legs a little bit more than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll finish off with one last kind of note here. Again, we kind of both agree that again, a lot of production is gone. There's going to be a lot of very, I would say, raw talent kind of being put out there for Fresno State. The good news is, at least according to CFB Winning Edge and his numbers right here, Fresno State has the 7th easiest team or easiest schedule in the entire country this year. Their toughest games are Purdue and Arizona State, so neither one of those are really world beaters in the Power 5. And
Arizona State doesn't scare me at all.
And both of those games are in the first 3 weeks of the season. After that, it is smooth sailing for Fresno State when it comes to the defenses they're facing. So if you have a team with a ton of kind of raw new guys, that's the kind of schedule you'd want them to face. So they're probably going to perform a little bit better than like even if they performed against their regular schedule. So just one last note to kind of throw out there. I think Mox and I both agree that this is a heavily underrated offense going into this year, especially guys like Malik Sherrod are just being criminally underdrafted right now. All right, Let's move on to our next team here because, again, we're about 40 minutes in, so I want to make sure that we get out at some point here, Mox. Let's go to Georgia Tech. This is our first Power 5 team. I'm going to try to kind of put out my whole argument for this team because nobody on this team is getting drafted right now. Except maybe Malik Rutherford late in like 20 plus round range and everything. But for the most part, like nobody's really being drafted pretty highly here. Jeff Collins is out. Brent Key is in. GT kind of made I want to say a surprise hire, but they hired Buster Faulkner from Georgia. He's an offensive analyst over there. He is coming in and is set to run a very similar system to Todd Monken. There was a lot of talk in Georgia circles that if Monken were to leave, that Faulkner would be the guy that they would use to replace him. Well, Monken took too long to make his decision. Faulkner had an opportunity at Georgia Tech, and they went that direction. And so now Georgia has Mike Bobo. So you got Buster Faulkner going over to Georgia Tech. Again, he's going to run a very similar system to Monken. Again, Monken's system was one of the best offenses in the entire country last year. They add in 2 receivers from the portal from big-time Power 5 programs. You got Christian Leary coming in over from Alabama, and then you got Dominic Blaylock coming in from Georgia, who was very reliable in the slot over there. They got Malik Rutherford returning there. They also add in Brett Seither, a tight end, coming over from Georgia. So again, familiarity with the coach. We saw what Faulkner and Monken were willing to do with tight ends with guys like Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington. You get the Monken-style offense in the ACC, where they are going to be forced to pass more due to game script, because Georgia Tech's defense is atrocious. To me, kind of my argument here is, like, tell me that couldn't be a ton of fun right here. The main problem is, of course, one, the schedule for Georgia Tech is awful, especially in the playoffs. They got Clemson and Georgia in weeks 11 and 13. And then, really, the main question is, what are they going to do at QB? Because it's either Haynes King or Zach Pyron, neither which really strikes a lot of confidence into anybody. But regardless, the fact that none of these guys are even kind of being nobody's really taking shots on a lot of these guys, to me feels like a mistake. What do you think, Mox?
Yeah, I expect Zach Pyron to be the guy at quarterback, which I think is better for this offense than Haynes King, because I think the best player on this offense is going to be Malik Rutherford, and he's being drafted sometimes. I don't want to say he's being drafted a lot, but he's a player who, would it surprise you if at the end of the day he had like 900 yards and like 8 touchdowns?
Not at all.
So I feel like that's, and to get there, you're looking at boom weeks, because he's probably going to do essentially nothing against Clemson and Georgia. Probably going to struggle against Miami. So you're looking, but the schedule is like pretty good. Right? You have SC State, you have Bowling Green, you have Boston College, you have UNC, who's always porous on defense. And you have a Virginia team who I don't think is going to be competitive on defense either this year. So you're looking at a guy who can win you weeks. So he's a player that I'm much more interested in potentially in best ball when I don't have to worry about knowing, or a player that I know that I'm going to get like 4 or 5 starts out of and just say, hey, like he can sit on my bench for the rest of the time, because you're going to know which weeks to start this dude. So I found myself really liking Malik Rutherford. He was awesome in spring too. Like they couldn't stop raving about how good he was. I think Christian Leary is pretty interesting as well. I just don't know how he's going to get utilized. But like he could be a player who sees like 4 or 5 touches, like Curtis Samuel in Washington, right? Like a player who could see like 4 or 5 touches out of the backfield, and a player who can catch 6 passes a game. That utilization wouldn't surprise me either, because he's a player who did play running back in high school, was kind of utilized there at Alabama when he got on the field. So I think there's a lot to be excited about, honestly, for this Georgia Tech offense. I don't know what the ceiling is, but I do think there's players who are going to be fantasy relevant that you probably need to consider drafting. And I think Malik Rutherford is one of them, and in deep leagues, Christian Leary is probably the other.
What about Brett Seither? Again, coming over from Georgia, following Buster Faulkner.
I trust you more because you're more familiar with him. I honestly don't know much about him outside of the fact that he's probably the tight end 1 in this offense, and the offense is one that likes to utilize the tight end. So, but I mean, I haven't drafted him, and I don't think he's being drafted. But in tight end premium leagues, or leagues where you need to start 2, like that doesn't feel like a bad bet.
No, again,
like is he like a dynamic athlete, or is he just like a reliable, like
definitely
get you 8 yards when you need it?
Definitely more closer to the reliable side here and everything like that. But again, like him going from the SEC to the ACC, maybe he can be utilized a little bit better there. I don't know. But again, like you said, Mox, like outside of the top 5 guys in CFF, thing like tight end is just so hard to predict. Why not take a shot on a guy that is following a guy where, again, we've seen one of the best tight ends in the country come out of the last couple of years. So we can definitely see there.
And this is an offense that returns all 5 offensive line starters too. So like that's huge consistency.
That's huge, but also they were one of the worst in terms of giving up sacks last year and everything like that. They were 117th in sacks allowed last year. So like it,
but that
bringing back
it makes me feel better that the unit is showing consistency, because I think the unit can be more than its sum of parts in this case. Like I think, like it was a hodgepodge, not very good unit last year, but I do think, another year in a very similar system, not having to worry about the Jeff Collins circus, I think there's reasons to be excited, or at least tentatively excited about this offensive line, because when you return 5 starters, like that matters.
It does.
Because there's familiarity, and I just think the unit is more important than like, I don't think any of these offensive linemen are all that good, but can they outperform their individual abilities? I think that's a possibility. That also doesn't mean that I'm drafting Dante Smith or Travion Cooley. That just means that I think the offense isn't going to be hindered by like horrible negative plays.
Yeah, speaking of that running back room and everything, I think this will continue to be a running back by committee, not only because, again, Monk can utilize the running back by committee at Georgia. Faulkner's probably have the same mindset. But again, you got Dante Smith, Travion Cooley, 2 kind of senior guys there. Neither one of them are great. So I don't think either one of them are going to break from the pack. And then also, Evan Dickens is a running back, a true freshman running back that has gotten a lot of praise this spring from coaching staff and from some of the older players about how quickly he was able to pick up the playbook. And if this is Monken's playbook, like that Faulkner's kind of bringing over and everything, that's a difficult playbook to comprehend. So he's probably going to be able to get into the mix there as well, maybe even take over some of the other younger guys that are there. It's probably going to be a 3-headed monster at running back if they're going to run the ball a ton. So I wouldn't trust any of these running backs.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go from Georgia, fly way out west, and let's go to Hawaii. Once again, another one of these teams I think we are a year early on last year, because we didn't expect Timmy Chang and them to just straight up not install the run and shoot last year. And then they're like, yeah, we'll do that year too. I'm like, I don't know why you didn't start a year early, even if it didn't work, but
I think
whatever.
So what happened, or at least what I was reading happened, was they got like into spring practice, started, and were like, oh gosh, this is not going to go well. I just stopped. And so they ran a super vanilla offense last year because.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that would definitely make sense. Again, like if this is truly the run and shoot offense that we're going to get this year, like they said they were going to install this spring, we know there's going to be fantasy value here because that's just what the run and shoot system gives us. The problem is there's just so little information that comes out of Hawaii. It's so hard to nail down who is going to be the value here. Let's look at some of the players that are involved here. Braden Strager, we pretty much are pretty solid that he will be the starting quarterback. Taking a QB7 or QB 57 in drafts like end of round 18 typically. So you're probably looking at it as like your fourth or fifth option, or actually fifth or sixth option at QB off the board. Kylan Hines is their running back, end of the 14th round typically, RB62 in drafts. Very explosive guy, but again, run and shoot system. How much volume is he going to get? The interesting part is, once again, we know there's going to be fantasy value at the wide receiver, but currently all three guys that people are kind of looking at, like Pinoque, Hines, and Walthall, they're all going outside that round 20 range. Like nobody's really kind of like reaching up to grab any one of those guys. So Mox, like what have you been able to find with the Rainbow Warriors here, man? Like what guys are you kind of looking at here?
Yeah, I've been pretty aggressive with Tylan Hines all offseason, drafting him. I am not as worried, I think, as some people are about the system because he's a player who is like a Calvin Turner type player for Hawaii. So like if you remember what Turner did, he was heavily involved in the passing game. Hines is the same type of player. I think if he doesn't have RB wide receiver eligibility, that is how he's going to be deployed at Hawaii. So I think he's a player who I kind of equate this to Jaquavius Marks at Mississippi State. He's a player who could catch legitimately 50 passes, in my opinion. And so I think that upside is there for him. And I think he's going to be used as the primary back. He's not big.
No, he's
not
big.
Same thing with Malik Sherrod, right? Malik Sherrod was 180. Tylan Hines, I think, is like 185, maybe.
No, he's
but it doesn't really
5'7", 170. I looked it up before the show. He's a pretty small guy.
He's smaller than that, but it doesn't matter. In these conferences, like they run these dudes who are tiny up the middle all the time and get them in space. And this is an offense that I think will get him in space and heavily utilize him as a receiver. So I really like what I've seen from Hines. Also drafting a lot of Braden Strager. So last year they were 30th in offensive pass rate in neutral game scripts at 52%. I expect that number to jump like 10% ish. Like 60 plus, 62, 63, which would be top 10. Like this is an offense that really wants to run a bunch of air raid concepts. So like Timmy Chang obviously ran that with June Jones at Hawaii. And Ian Shoemaker, who is the offensive coordinator, came over from Eastern Washington, another air raid team. Like you'll get some version of the run and shoot, air raid, like all of those concepts implemented this year. That they focus on implementing that in the spring. It will definitely happen. So this offense is going to be a lot more pass heavy. The other thing, which is why I like this offense's ceiling overall, is they just weren't running that many plays last year. Like they were basically playing keep away as much as they could because they didn't have the ability to run the system that they wanted to. So they were 105th in offensive pace. So like plays per minute. I just don't think that's what they want to do. Ian Shoemaker ranked 9th in plays when he was his last season at Eastern Washington, like plays per second, or plays per minute. I think he wants to run a fast offense, and he wasn't able to last year because he didn't have the players to do so. So yeah, I think this is definitely an improvement. I'm drafting Strager. I'm drafting Hines. I think you just take a stab at the receiver that you want to at this point. Like mine's been Jonah Pinoque. He's the most tenured guy. He's one of the most experienced. I've been targeting him. I know that others really like Chucky Hines, or I believe it's pronounced Chucky. I don't think it's Chucky.
It is Chucky. Everybody I've heard has said Chucky.
Okay, so Chucky Hines, and I think Mike Bainbridge is someone who really likes Hines because he projects him to be the slot receiver there. So it's all these guys, Jalen Watt-Hall, Jonah Pinoque, and Chucky Hines are all guys I think you can target. Just pick one and take a stab.
Yeah, because again, I'm fully with you. To me, this situation in Hawaii is kind of a very similar one to like what's going on in Kentucky and everything, where like you have two guys, and I think most people are either in on Pinoque or Chucky Hines at this point. One of them is in the what people say is like the historically productive spot. So like Tavian Robinson at Kentucky is going to play in the slot. Liam Cohen loves to target the slot. But then you have the guy on the outside, Barian Brown, Jonah Pinoque in this instance, who are probably the more talented guys. So they are probably going to be the ones that are going to be able to make the big plays a bit more. So which one do you kind of take your stab on? like you said, Mox, I think that's really up to each individual drafter. I'm a systems guy, so I'm probably going to have more Chucky Hines than I am going to have Jonah Pinoque. But at the same time, I do see a world where this offense, like even though they typically target the slot, they're more than willing to kind of shift things over and target the just most valuable guy on the field. Because that's just what good offensive coordinators do a lot of times. So.
And you know who might be the wide receiver one on this team? It might be Tylen Hines. He might lead them in receptions.
He could. And
like,
in which case that would be incredible.
The answer. Like if I had to bet right now who has the most receptions, like he'd probably be second. Wow. Like a wide receiver one would be first. I want a Pinoque or Hines, but I think Chucky Hines. I think Tylen Hines could probably be second on this team in receptions. And I don't know. I just think he has like 50, 60 reception upside in this offense. Maybe I'm just totally off and all of my Tylen Hines will just be lit on fire. But I just really like him. I just think he's a good player at the end of the day. So like his role, his utilization, like all of those things line up.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm not going to argue with you on any of that right there, but we will definitely see. Let's get back stateside here. Let's go or continental stateside here. And let's go talk about the Temple Owls here, man. This is like Temple has historically just been a team that we CFFers just forget about. Like it's never been like a team that people really love to get value out of here. But this year, got a lot of people are kind of very interested in this group, mostly because they're terrible. And last year, that terribleness led to an insane number of passes from quarterback E.J. Warner, who in the second half of the season averaged 48.3 passes per game and thankfully completed a lot of those. He was in the second half of the season had a 60+% completion percentage. So it's not like he was throwing a ton of balls that were all just hitting the ground. Here is my concern, though. I still think Temple's going to be bad, so I think I'm not worried about the game script, even though they did only pass 40% of the time when they were in neutral game scripts last year, but I don't think they're going to be in neutral game scripts that often here. The thing that concerns me the most is the fact that while E.J. Warner was passing almost 50 times per game last year, his average yards per attempt in the second half of the season was 6.75. yards per attempt. So they're not throwing the ball deep down the field whatsoever. And that to me limits the upside here for this system. But EJ Warner's not the only guy here. Again, you want to bet on the volume? That's great. Hopefully they put it down the field a little bit more often. But Ahmad Anderson Jr. is a wide receiver that I'm starting to get a little bit more interested in here. Because again, in a PPR league, if you're the wide receiver one on a team that's passing almost 50 times per game, that can lead to an insane number of receptions, even if you're not doing much with those receptions. Like in PPR league, that's absolutely insane. And then the same goes for a guy like at tight end and David Martin Robinson, who in 2 out of his 3 last games last year, he had 10 plus targets. Like Mox, I know you wrote an article on David Martin Robinson and everything like that. So you want to dive a little bit more into him? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, he was just down the stretch. He was one of the most utilized options of the position. And I think that's by design. I don't think that's by accident. I mean, if you look at his last 6 games, last 8 games, I apologize. He would be 4th among all tight ends in returning target share. Like that's a player that I think you really want to be looking at. So like if he's going to get, 6 targets per game at the tight end position, he's definitely going to outperform our current expectations for him. So yeah, he's a guy that I'm pretty aggressive with drafting. I've also taken a lot of EJ Warner, to be honest. I just see this offense passing 40 plus times a game. He's the best player in the field. Like, why would you not put the ball in his hands and like not hand it off to EJ Wilson and Edward Sadie like 30 times a game? Maybe I'm wrong about what this offense really wants to do, but I think you got EJ Warner, who surprised with how good he was last year. And I think they're just going to put the ball in his hands and let him throw 50 times a game. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're freaking Temple, man.
I was saying,
seriously.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly kind of the right way to think about it here and everything. And again, I'm hoping they kind of bring up that average yards per attempt, because I hope they get way more aggressive than they did.
I think they will. And again, right, we're talking about an offensive line that was bad last year, but returns 4. So like this is the George Dett corollary we just talked about, which is like, yeah, they returned a lot of offensive linemen and experience, but like they weren't good. So how much does that familiarity within the system matter? So I think it's going to be better unit because like they were 124th in average line yards last year. So like they weren't a good unit. So they do return their 4 best linemen in my opinion.
It's also one of the worst rushing teams in general because like Edward Sadie,
just don't run. Just run. Just throw it 60 times. Like what? Who is stopping you? Nobody.
But here's the other question I kind of have about this team. Again, Temple, we both agree Temple's terrible. Like even if they do throw 60 times a game, there's not really much upside to this team in general, especially when it comes to touchdowns. Like that's kind of the main thing here is that like, yes, Jose Barbin had 72 catches for 918 yards last year. Like that's a great stat line for a CFF wide receiver.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that he only had 2 touchdowns. Like that's what's going to keep you from starting him on a week by week basis in a lot of leagues is that you know for a fact that like at max he's going to get 1 touchdown because that's how many touchdowns Temple's going to score. So where do they improve on that? And especially for a guy like Ahmad Anderson, who I like in terms of the volume and everything, that is kind of the thing that scares me into drafting him where he's currently going around the mid 18th round and everything like that. That makes it feel a bit more fair for him to go that late. What do you say to that, Mox?
Yeah, and so I think they were historically low in terms of drive to like points per opportunity. Like I expect their points per opportunity to go up simply because I just think EJ Warner is better than 30 of the worst quarterbacks in the country, essentially. Like that's the bet that I'm making, that Temple, who was bottom 5 in points per opportunity last year, is just going to be better. Period. Okay. I just think statistics is literally the answer to that. It's like you cannot be that bad with how many plays you're running, plus how efficient your offense was in terms of production. So like I just don't think those two will match.
Yeah.
Like I just think statistically it can only get better.
Yeah, no. Again,
that's my answer. So I'm just basing it on like law of averages, man.
I would say that's exactly what you're arguing is that you're like things are going to regress to the mean. Like if it happens again this year, that's just incredibly bad luck on Temple's part.
And some offenses are like that too.
Yeah.
Like some offenses are just bad and can't convert. But like Temple, I think is better than like a bottom 5 unit. I think they're a bottom 30 unit. But the difference between that, like bottom 5 and bottom 30, is huge when we talk about fantasy production.
So, Mox, one more thing before we move on from Temple here. I forgot to mention some of the ADPs of the guys that are going through here, but I did want to get your reaction on this. What do you think the ADP of Martin Robinson is right now? For a guy
at the position or around?
Either one.
Tight end 27.
Okay, not that low. He's tight end 18 right now.
Okay. He must have risen a lot in the last month or so.
And based on the way we talk about him, and like you said, that like with the target share that he's getting, I'm kind of surprised he hasn't risen higher because you wrote a very convincing article on him and everything about him being one of those guys. Like again, after like what I'm looking at my tight end rankings here, like pretty much after tight end 5 with like Luke Lachey, like starting with RJ Maryland and everybody down from there like that, like it's a big hodgepodge of guys you're just taking shots on. I figured when an article like you wrote came out about how great like the upside of David Martin Robinson is, I thought he would like shoot up into people's like top 12. He'd be a guy going off in the same range as like Jalen Conyers, Brady Hunt.
I don't have the power that like Austin Nace has when he talks about a player on campus life. Like he moves mountains. He moves ADP like someone could move mountains. I just don't have that power.
I'm surprised.
So I'll take all the David Martin Robinson discount that I can get.
I'm surprised, dude, because you wrote a great article on that, which you should go check out at campuscanton.com. Let's move on to another team here. We're going back out West Coast. This is what happens when I am doing things alphabetical. We just end up hopping around all over the country. Let's talk about the UNLV Rebels over here. Again, the big story here, Brennan Marion coming in to be offensive coordinator with his go-go style offense. Moxie, you have kind of dug deep on what he was able to do at some of his previous stops at William & Mary and at Howard. What can we kind of expect from this go-go offense at UNLV this year?
Yeah, so for those who aren't super familiar with what the offense is, it's kind of an offshoot of Gus Malzahn's offense. So he was the wide receiver under Malzahn at Tulsa. kind of jumped. He's been kind of all over the place. He's been in the NFL. He's been in college, but he really developed this go-go offense at William & Mary and Howard and kind of refined it. What it is it relies on two backs in the backfield, need a mobile quarterback, very heavy reliance on uneven formations, takes a lot of the spread offense concepts, and then takes the triple option concepts, and he describes it as you can run any play in the playbook with his combination of things. And I think that's true. I think it's a pretty interesting offense in the way he runs it. But two backs and a very mobile quarterback with uneven formations is how I would describe it, like in one sentence. I think this offense can work. There's skepticism about whether it can and whether or not they have the pieces to run it. I trust the ingenuity of this offense enough. So when last time that we saw him be like calling plays, look at Kalen Newton, who's Cam Newton's brother at William & Mary, ran for 1,200 yards and 16 touchdowns.
Newton was at Howard.
Oh, Howard. Yeah, sorry. I'm getting all my FCS teams mixed up today.
All 300 of them?
Well, although
how many FCS teams are there? I forget.
Didn't Newton follow him to William & Mary for a year? I don't know. Maybe not. I
could look it up.
Either way, Kalen Newton ran for 1,200 yards and 16 touchdowns. And he averaged 8.7 yards per attempt, which tells me that this isn't just like a short to line of scrimmage offense. This is an offense that wants to at least try to push the ball downfield. And I think they have two good receiving options in there with Ricky White and Jacob DeJesus, who, they both played a lot out of the slot last year. DeJesus will definitely operate out of the slot because he's like really, really tiny.
Yes.
But he's a really dynamic player. Ricky White's definitely being drafted. DeJesus, I don't believe is, unless he's going like around 19 or 20. Yeah. So he's a guy that I like. And they lost Jeff Weimer to the portal maybe 2 weeks ago now, a really late entry. And so I think that those two could see like 30% of target shares each. I just don't like the options behind them all that much. I just think this offense has upside. I really do. I really like their potential this year and long term.
Yeah, I think, and again, some of the things that might pop up when people talk about this offense is like, whoa, okay, they have Barry Odom. He's a defensively minded head coach and everything like that. But I mean, history shows that Odom is not afraid to take his hands off the offense. Like, namely, look at what Josh Heupel was able to do at Missouri in 2016 and 2017. Like, Odom is not afraid.
Barry Odom, he's a smart guy.
Yeah,
like he knows that he's not an offensive guy, so he hires the best offensive guy he can. Brendan Merrick, he wanted Bobby Petrino.
Yeah, that was.
Which listen, you could say a lot about Bobby Petrino, but he knows how to run an offense.
That's true.
That is his one positive quality.
This is very, very true. Again, other things here and everything like that. Like you mentioned, Ricky White being taken in the mid-15th round, wide receiver 74. I think that's a steal compared to where he's going. And then Jacob DeJesus, like you mentioned, he is a guy going drafted outside the top 20 rounds and everything like that. He's definitely a guy I would shoot late for in some of your drafts. Courtney Brees is the supposed next guy up at running back. He kind of looks to replace Aiden Robinson. I don't think we can really expect too much out of him because, again, I went back and looked at what Brendan Marion was able to do with running backs at William & Mary and at Howard, and there's just really not much there, so I wouldn't take the shot there.
The problem is he keeps two on the field at all times, essentially.
Yeah.
Like there's not a primary back in this system. Oh, and there's never been.
And he loves to run his quarterbacks, which is another reason why he should probably take a shot on Doug Brumfield. Like I would say, just the absolute insane rushing numbers I've seen out of some of his quarterbacks at William & Mary and Howard are just mouth-watering for CFF.
Kalen Newton, who is like a quarter of the athlete that he is of his brother Cam, was a monster on the ground.
Oh yeah,
like Doug Brumfield is a legitimately really athletic quarterback, and so he only had I think 33 design rushes last year. Like it wouldn't surprise me if that number was like
60,
100.
Oh
no,
okay,
like 100.
Okay, we're going even.
I mean more than 10 design rushes a game. I mean, or 100, 12 game. Let's say 8 design rushes a game.
8 design rushes a game makes sense.
So like 90, let's say like between 90 and 100. I don't think is out of the question. If you're getting like 90 to 100 design rushes, like that's going to be a productive player. Plus, I think we like the wide receivers. Like Ricky White was really inconsistent last year. Like he had a lot of trouble with drops. But if he can improve, I think there's a lot of upside there.
So, Mox, I got two more questions for you. We're going to look at the schedule of UNLV here because that is kind of another selling point for this offense taking off here this upcoming year.
They're like top 3 in terms of...
According to CFB Winning Edge, they're the third easiest schedule among G5 teams this year. I'm gonna list off the names, and you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down of whether you start Ricky White, Doug Brumfield that week. I mean, obviously, it depends on your team, but just like in a vacuum, would you start them?
Okay.
Bryant.
Yes.
This is an obvious no, but Michigan.
No.
Vanderbilt.
Probably not.
UTEP.
Yes.
Hawaii.
Absolutely.
Nevada.
No question.
Colorado State.
Billion%.
Fresno State.
Probably.
New Mexico.
Yep.
Hawaii. Or not Hawaii. Wyoming.
Yeah, probably.
Air Force.
Probably not.
San Jose State.
Yep.
Like that's like what, 3/4 of the schedule that you're pretty confidently saying yes that you're going to start them that week. That's another reason why I did. Like, again, if things don't work out, like if they're not going by midseason, obviously that's not like, then we were probably just a year too early on this offense and everything like that. But if they get going, like you got a great back half of the schedule there where you're pretty much starting them pretty much any given week right there. That's my last question to Mox. Percentage
is Doug Brumfield being drafted right now, by the way?
Yes, he is. Like mid-late 19th round, so QB 61.
That's about right. Okay.
Last question, Mox. What percentage chance would you put out there that we're a year early on this offense?
50%.
You think it's about 50-50 shot?
50-50 shot we're just a year early, and they just don't have the pieces to run this offense. I think that might be true just because I don't like the receiver depth all that much. I don't like Courtney Reese or Vincent Davis. They don't really have like the offensive line wasn't very good last year. They were 122nd in average line yards. They had 2 transfers, one from Arkansas and one from Buffalo, who were better than anybody they had. But there's a it might be like 60-40 that we're a year too early, but that shouldn't. But
given where they're going in drafts.
Yes, given where they're going, like the upside is clearly there, especially for a player like Brumfield and Ricky White. Like they have the potential to finish top 24 of their position.
Yeah, Brumfield's being a guy.
I don't know that Brumfield will get there, but he could.
But like Brumfield's like your 5th or 6th quarterback off the board. Like if you don't nail your 5th or 6th quarterback off the board,
perfect 6th quarterback.
Like you're not crying yourself to sleep at night. Ricky White, he is your 6th, 7th wide receiver off the board typically. If you don't nail that, you're not crying yourself to sleep at night. Jacob DeJesus.
And you just invest in upside at that point.
Exactly.
Hey, when you're getting to your 6th or 7th wide receiver, just take upside shots. Guys who are going to win you leagues. Like you don't have to play it safe. Like if you want to win, you have to take upside shots. And this offense is an upside shot offense, and the defense is terrible.
It's truly horrendous.
That's my selling point. Yeah.
All right. Speaking of upside offenses that may not survive or they may not get going in year 1, but also have terrible defenses. Let's go back to South Florida, going way back over to the East Coast. Let's go talk about the South Florida Bulls here. Again, big headliner of the offseason, Alex Golesh, the offensive coordinator the last 2 years at Tennessee, is taking over as the head coach. All expectations are he's going to bring a very similar style offense over here to South Florida. He has 2 offensive coordinators, but they're kind of OCs in name only. They're more there to make sure that system runs as well as it possibly can. The main kind of things here are, is this a year too early for this offense? Because they lose a little bit during the offseason. Their 2 best receivers, Xavier Weaver and Jimmy Horn, are both lured away by Colorado and Deion Sanders. Not really a lot of solidified guys there behind them that they've even brought in, so we'll get to them in a second. But we'll start at the quarterback situation here, Mox. Byron Brown, man, what a finish to the season that he had, all right? Like,
oh, yeah.
The passing numbers were kind of okay. I mean, the game against Tulsa was great, 240, 3 touchdowns, but man, his rushing numbers, 12 attempts, 76 yards, and a touchdown against Tulsa, 15 attempts, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns against UCF. Like, we know for a fact Alex Golesh is not afraid to run his QBs. Again, we saw that with Hendon Hooker. So it's not like Brown's going to get neutered with Golesh coming in here. They're going to utilize his legs, and they're probably going to improve his passing game with the simplified concepts that they're going to be running in that kind of system. So Byron Brown is there. We're all hoping he's the starter, but Gary Bohannon's still kind of hanging around and everything like that. Are you nervous at all about him being a threat here, Mox, or are we pretty sold on Byron Brown? 'Cause I'm pretty sold on Byron Brown.
I'm pretty. If Bohannon had played in the spring, I would be less convinced. But I mean, he was hurt all spring, and so I don't think there's a chance that he's going to jump him after not playing and being able to install the new concepts. Like, you're not. I find it hard to believe that Bohannon's going to be rolled out there after that. So yeah, I like Brown. And he was really efficient last year on the ground too. Like 31 attempts for 179 yards is really good, considering that counts sack yardage. Mm-hmm. So we know that he's an above average rusher at the position. There's a lot to like about that profile. If there's one offense on this list though that I think we're a year too early on, it's this one.
Yeah, I think that's really the thing that nags me in the back of my head, because I love Byron Brown. I've been drafting a ton of him. I've been taking shots on Naquan Wright, Kelly Joyner, who we'll get to go those guys here in a second. I've been taking shots on them as well. I guess we'll go ahead and get into this receiver situation. So again, Horn, Weaver, they're gone. They're going to Colorado. Really wish they would have stayed, because I would have been way more confident in this offense. But Kelly Joyner is a running back in this system, but he's kind of been like more of that kind of scat back where they've been passing him a ton out of the backfield. He's apparently moved over to slot. I don't know if it's full time, but he's moving over to slot, which again, if you watch Tennessee the past couple of years, that slot position has been very, very productive. So he's by far the most experienced player in the receiver room. Again, he's not obviously been a receiver very long, but he's a guy that the coaching staff clearly trusts to move over there. They also bring in Michael Brown-Stevens, the wide receiver out of Minnesota that a lot of us kind of liked going into last year. Then he didn't really do anything for the Golden Gophers. So he's there. And then Mox, you mentioned in your write-up for this team in the CFF guide about, and I'm pronouncing this correctly, I hope, Naeem Simmons. I believe he is coming up from, is it JUCO or the FCS? You kind of mentioned him.
FCS transfer.
Can you kind of dive into those two guys right there? What do you kind of expecting out of this receiver room?
Yeah, if I had to like plant my flag on somebody, it would be Michael Brown-Stevens, because he's a Power 5 guy who is coming down from Minnesota, and I think that there's a lot to like about the idea of a Power 5 guy headed to the AAC.
The problem is the last two guys that came from the Power 5 to USF, Joffrey Brown and Joe from UNC and Clemson respectively, both completely flamed out here. But also that's not the same coaching staff, so.
Yeah. Well, so I think the most electric player in this room is going to be Naeem Simmons. He was really, really good last year at Wagner. Coming up from the FCS level, he had 50 catches for 796 yards and 6 touchdowns. And this is not an offense that was like really high flying and like fantastic like passing offense. Like he was the guy. Mm-hmm. And he was also the leader in a whole bunch of, like, he was an all conference player. He wasn't an All-American, but he was like the best receiver in his conference. Northeast, I think it's like the Northeast Conference. I try to remember what the NEC is, but I'm pretty sure it's the Northeast Conference. So he's a pretty dynamic player. Probably going to operate out of the slot, and I think that could be the role that was somewhat held by Jalen Hyatt last year. Like, if you want to make a 1-for-1 comparable to somewhere where Galesh was, I think Simmons could be used similarly. They're similar size and they're kind of similar profiles. Like, he's 5'10", 180. Speed is his calling card. Like, he operates deep better than anywhere else. Like, if you want to take a stab really late in drafts, like, that's somebody that I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I'm glad you're able to break that down, because again, like I literally read that in the guide. This is also part of the reason why you should get the guide, because there are things in there that I didn't even know about, because we have such an incredible team at the campus of Canton over here for the CFF team that we're able to find all these amazing nuggets. So good on you, Mox. You found something that even I didn't know about. And
he's probably if I had to guess based on spring and his background, he's probably the primary kick returner and punt returner. It's like, he's going to be on the field and like be able to showcase his ability. Like, always something that I think is important when trying to impress a new coaching staff.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll touch on the running back situation here, and I can already kind of hear some people kind of scoffing a little bit, being like, oh, like Alex Golesh didn't really feature a back over at Tennessee and everything like that. Why are we concerned about what he would do at running back over at USF? as I kind of dive deeper into like the coaching trees that have kind of sprouted off some of these kind of veer and shoot systems, and again, thank you to Nate Marquise for kind of breaking down a lot of that in some of his coaching change articles. A lot of like there's more than you would think for a lot of these veer and shoot systems. There's a lot to be said about like when these coaches find somebody that they truly believe is like head and shoulders above the rest of the room, they're not afraid to run them. Tennessee ran the ball a ton last year. It's just that Jabari Small and Jalen Wright didn't really separate from each other. There was not like a huge difference between either one, so they're willing to run them both. Here at USF, Naquan Wright, it sounds like, is really kind of head and shoulders above the rest of that running back room right now, especially if Brian Batty leaving for Auburn. And if Kelly Joyner truly does move full-time to the slot, like it makes a lot of sense for Naquan Wright to kind of get that workload that we're looking for. And if this offense kind of gets going in year one here, like this offense is going to score a ton, and Naquan Wright's going to get a good chunk of those touchdowns. Just by being out there. Yeah, maybe he doesn't get like the 250 touches that some of these other veer and shoot running backs do, but if they score a ton in the AAC, like the touchdown upside is going to be pretty good for him there. What do you think, Mox?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the argument again, right? Like, I get it.
You get it.
I think he's going to be the RB1 as well. I think he's going to see 55 to 60% of touches, which is feature back workload. I don't know how good this offense is going to be, and I don't know that they're going to. That's the major question,
isn't it?
I don't know that he's going to have enough touchdown opportunity to hit what we need, right? So like Byron Brown is probably going to get like a bunch of red zone opportunities that might go to Wright.
This is very true,
and those red zone opportunities are probably going to be limited anyway. So that's the concern that I have when I'm talking about Wright. But I mean, late in drafts, you're getting a guy who's probably going to get 55% of touches. So like, you're not going to find that in
he's going
rounds 20 to 30.
He's going as the RB 99 in drafts in like late round 19 right now. So like, again, it's a ton of upside there. And like, I'm trying something out a little bit where I like a lot of people talk about like, you know, receiver, quarterback stacks and stuff like that. I'm trying something out this year where I kind of target what I call like some QB running back stacks, where like the ball is going to touch two people's hands at any given point during the game. It's either going to be the feature running back or it's going to be the quarterback who's either going to run it or they're going to throw it. An example is like DTR and Zach Charbonnet last year, where like 90% of any given play on offense for UCLA was going to one of those two guys. And I was able to, at least in one league, get both of those guys in that productive offense. And it was absolute magic for me in CFF because they got into high scoring games, and whoever got the touchdown, I was benefiting from it. I think you could see a similar situation here with Byron Brown and Naquan Wright, where it's like either going to be Brown who is going to throw the ball or run the ball himself, or it gets handed off to Naquan Wright in any kind of close game. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
I think this is going to increase value there if you're able to pair him up with Brown. All right. Let's go and talk about our last team here. Going back to the Power 5, another nerd school, but you know the nerd schools are they're looking up this year. We got Vanderbilt over here, and last year was quite truly their best year in a long, long while. They almost made a bowl game, which is a minor miracle for Vanderbilt right now. I truly think they're hiring of Bud Simmons legitimately might be one of the most underrated hires I think I've seen a team make in a long time, because I really do think with the experience he had on like the recruiting trail and everything, he was able to kind of go in there and kind of revamp, because he's the director of their players personnel over there. I think he was able to kind of revamp
24/7 for a long time.
He was with 24/7 for a long time, so he was able to kind of go in there and kind of revamp, like, alrighty, we're not going to land the top guys, but I know how to kind of look for diamonds in the rough, and they've done a really good job the last couple of years, because they got instant impact freshmen last year, like AJ Swan, who was kind of going back and forth with Mike Wright. You had Jaden McGowan, who played as their wide receiver 2 last year, probably going to be their wide receiver 2 again this year. This year, Cedric Alexander is set to be their, at least, again, I don't know if he kind of separates himself as a clear RB1, but he'll probably get the first touch when the fall comes around and everything like that. I do think that this team is kind of getting on the up and up. We avoid Vanderbilt players because they've just been so far behind the rest of the SEC, even the SEC East, which is the weaker division by far. But now are they a bit more valuable now that we're seeing them compete with the likes of, Kentucky, Missouri, Florida? Like they're not super far behind everything anymore. I'm kind of curious to see where Vanderbilt kind of goes this year. Again, maybe they caught people off guard last year. They're going to kind of regress back again this year because people kind of take them a bit more seriously. But Box, like guys like Bo Shepherd, Cedric Alexander, we'll see how much that goes. It's probably going to be by committee at least to start the year. What do you kind of think about these guys?
I like them more than I would have in previous seasons, for the reasons that you gave, right? So their first 2 weeks, Hawaii, Alabama, A&M. You're starting Vanderbilt players in those games. So they're going to be favored by double digits plus in each of those. So like Alabama, A&M, they'll probably be favored by 20-ish points. UNLV, Missouri, like those are games you can start them. Yep. You can't start them basically the last 6 weeks of the season, in my opinion. Like that's the concern with this offense. Like I just don't think that you're starting them against Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Auburn, South Carolina, or Tennessee. They're probably going to be double-digit dogs, and so like you're taking AJ Swan and Will Shepherd and starting them, but still, I don't feel great about that. But the first 6 weeks of the season, like you kind of know what you're getting from this Vanderbilt team, and I think that could be something good, better than it's ever been. And I think Cedric Alexander is a pretty interesting player, just considering how much he was talked about in the spring. I think Jaden McGowan is good. I just don't necessarily know what his upside is. I think he could be better than Will Shepherd, but
yeah, from a talent perspective,
it's an interesting offense.
It is kind of an interesting offense. Again, like the only guy who's being drafted out of this bunch is Will Shepherd, and he's being drafted as a wide receiver 49, early round 12 kind of range. Everybody else is being undrafted. I'm not going to draft AJ Swan, even though I kind of like this offense for the upcoming year, because like you said, like things can go badly for Vanderbilt pretty quickly. I'm not going to worry about. Again, he doesn't have elite passing numbers. He doesn't have elite passing attempt numbers, and he doesn't have the dual threat ability I really want to see. Cedric Alexander, again, I've been on the record that I'm very high on him. I do think he'll be the RB1. I think he'll probably separate himself as the year goes along here. And you mentioned, Mox, like the second half of the season that you're not going to start him against Florida, not going to start him against Kentucky and everything. But Vanderbilt beat both of those teams last year. Again, probably going to get a better version of Florida, or hopefully, actually, Florida could end up being a dumpster fire by year's end. We'll see how that goes. But even still, like in those games, Ray Davis got 26 and 30 carries in those games. So, like, there is value that if they are able to keep it competitive with some of those games down the stretch, you're kind of okay starting at least a running back there because you know for a fact that they're going to, that's where they want to go with the ball for the most part.
I don't have their win total in front of me.
I can
so it's 3.5. I think that's probably about right. Which that they expect them to win against Hawaii, expect them to win against Alabama, A&M, and then be competitive in two of their matchups. And I think those matchups are good. And one of, like Wake Forest,
I don't think
South Carolina, maybe.
I don't think they're going to get Wake Forest.
That's the concern that I have.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's also the concern that I have is that like the offense will be too unpredictable to kind of know which weeks they'll be productive for. Because there's no way you would have gone into last season and started Ray Davis against Florida or Kentucky because you would have thought like, oh, Florida and Kentucky, they're going to take care of Vanderbilt and everything like that. But then they surprised everybody. We'll see. You need
best ball only. I just can't imagine starting them in any matchup that isn't part of their first 4 games.
Alrighty. With that happy note, we will finish up here. Mox, we had a great show here. I hope everybody got to learn just a little bit more here. I really need to fix these graphics at some point. I hope everybody learned just a little bit more, maybe found some different diamonds in the rough that you hadn't really considered before. Again, like pretty much a lot of the guys that we talked about here, like I looked up their ADPs for a reason because I'm like, I wanted to make sure we were talking about guys that are going relatively later in your drafts. Again, I think the only true top guy we talked about was Torrey Horton, who goes in the first, second round. Yeah. But everybody else, these are guys that are going in like the round 15 plus range. Oh, LeJontay Wester as well. But again, everybody else, like round 15 plus range. Like these are guys that, quite frankly, I think if we bought into them just a little bit more, I could see them moving up into like, or at least some of them like moving into like top 10 round range where like again, that's how this works. It's how this industry works, where a lot of us kind of start buying into the same guy. Some people start taking them a little bit earlier, and it kind of builds on itself. Suddenly, a guy that was in the round 18 range 2 months ago is now a top round guy.
Lots of groupthink.
There is lots of groupthink. And again, like, it's both a good and a bad thing, because again, it helps us kind of learn about different players that we hadn't learned before. When you see a guy get taken higher, like, there's something there. But also, again, it can lead to different things. Like, I can't think of any players off the top of my head from last year, but again, there were definitely a ton of busts last year where we all bought into.
Chris Brooks is a good example of a guy who's going like round 20 and then shot way up and busted.
Yeah, Miles Price is another one. Maybe he wasn't like round 20, but like, he was going in like round 10, 12 range, all of a sudden jumped up into like round 2 range because we were all so bought into the idea that he would be the guy at Texas Tech. Boom, he busted. Another example right there. But again, this kind of helps you provide a lot of different ways that you kind of think about it. Just some offenses that I think just, for the most part, we just haven't really been talking about enough. So, Mox, you kind of have any final thoughts here on some of the teams we talked about, some of the players we talked? What do you think?
No, I just think they're all, you're shooting for upside in these late rounds. So that's what to keep in mind, right? Like, we understand that there's risk in every single offense that we talked about, which is why they're underrated or not getting talked about a lot. I do think there's a lot of upside with these. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're talking about drafting. The way you win drafts is taking these home run shots. And so that's what I would keep in mind. But besides that, I would just say, all of this information that we talked about today, like, it's all in our CFF guide.
It's all there.
Like, you can read it and come to the same conclusions that we did. So I would definitely recommend purchasing that if you haven't already, and read through all the, like, everything we talked about, is in there.
Yeah, pretty much the only thing I did in terms of researching for today outside of our CFF guide was just looking up previous season stats. That's pretty much the only thing that I wrote down in our ADP. Well, our ADPs in our CFF guide, but just like looking up different guys that are outside of our profiles and everything like that. Like, other than that, like, everything I grabbed from the guide. That's how much information you can get out of it. So definitely go purchase that. It's only $20 on campuscanton.com now. Mox, you've been incredible. All of you who are listening are incredible as well. We'll be back here next Monday. For those of you who are listening now, make sure you go ahead and check out last night's CFF mock draft live stream. I got Tommy Harvey from dynastypros.com on this week. It is a ton of fun. So make sure you go and listen to that. Get your CTN double dose this week by listening to that. But outside of that, really appreciate you guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed weekend. I'll see you guys.